Hey guys, just a few more grammar concepts in this course, and phrases is one of our last concepts here. And phrases can be a little complicated, learning about different types of phrases, but it's really not that bad once you get the information down. So, a phrase is a group of related words that does not form a complete sentence. So, a phrase, um, again, it's just words that go together. They often have a common function. However, they don't contain a subject and a verb, subject and a predicate like a complete sentence would. And learning to identify different types of phrases it'll function in a couple ways. It will help you better understand sentence patterns. There are a few phrases in particular that really make you think about how a sentence functions in order to identify the phrase. And also, the more you know about your language, the better writer you will be. So, the more you know about how words function and work together, then it will improve your writing. So there are 5 types of phrases that we will be learning about today, and you will be asked to identify these on quizzes and tests. So let's start with the most common, and you probably already recognize this one because we've discussed it before, and that is a prepositional phrase. And all a prepositional phrase consists of is a preposition, its object, and any related modifiers. And again, we've talked about prepositions, so this should be fairly familiar to you. So I'll just give you a few examples here. The car in the driveway needed repair. The word in is a preposition, the driveway is its object, and usually prepositional phrases, they're often just those 3-word phrases. Tiger lilies grew beside the road. They can be shorter. You can have a 2-word prepositional phrase. Within hours, we arrived at our destination. So that can happen. In order to be a phrase, it has to be at least 2 words. That's kind of the minimum. Otherwise, it's just a word, a part of speech. So that's really the shortest type of prepositional phrase you'll see. You can also have longer ones. We hope to sleep during the painfully long and boring flight. Here, we just have quite a few modifiers that go with the word flight. During flight is the object, during the flight, but painfully long and boring, those all modify the word flight. So here we have a longer prepositional phrase, but that's not as common. Typically, you're going to see those 2 and 3-word prepositional phrases, but they always begin with a preposition, so it's the easiest way to recognize them. All right, so that's phrase 1. The second type of phrase you'll need to recognize is called an appositive phrase. And again, I think we've discussed this a little bit in passing, what an appositive is. And an appositive phrase renames the word or words it follows, and an appositive phrase is usually set off by commas. So they are really easy to recognize. So for example, Toni Morrison, author of several books, won the Nobel Prize for Literature. So that phrase, author of several books, is renaming the words that it follows, Toni Morrison. And a lot of times an appositive phrase it's renaming the subject of the sentence. The movie, a fast-paced adventure story, received rave reviews. Same setup. We have the subject of the sentence, an appositive phrase that renames it, and then the rest of the sentence. Now, every so often you will have an appositive at the end of a sentence, such as in this example. We went on a vacation to Disney World, the most magical place on earth. So that can happen, but it still functions the same way. It is renaming the words that precede it, Disney World. An appositive phrase can be as simple as a name. My professor, Dr. Joan McPherson, is a very difficult grader. So it can be short, it can be long. It usually is going to come in the middle of a sentence, right after the subject. Sometimes it can come at the end of the sentence. All right, another type of phrase you'll be asked to identify is an infinitive phrase. Now, when we talked about modifiers, we talked a little bit about infinitives. And all an infinitive is the word to plus a verb. Okay, so that's an infinitive phrase. It's just when you have a phrase that begins with to run, to swim, to eat, to create, any of those to plus a verb, and then any words that go along with that phrase. So, for example, college is a great place to meet new friends. I would love to give my daughter a pony. So you can see there to meet, to give. An infinitive phrase is really pretty easy to identify because it always begins with to plus a verb. Sally wanted to eat donuts before we went swimming. So this one, you really just have to memorize that. Infinitive, to plus a verb, and then you can always recognize an infinitive phrase. One quick cautionary word to remember that the word to can also function as a preposition. So just because it begins with the word to doesn't make it an infinitive phrase. It has to be to plus a verb. Because in a phrase like this, we went to the movies last night, that is actually a prepositional phrase. So just a little something to tuck away in your mind, that it doesn't, don't just look at the word to and say, oh, infinitive phrase. It has to be to plus a verb. Okay, so those first three are really pretty easy. The last two, we have to kind of stop and I have to teach you some terms. And so here's where it gets a little more complicated. So just bear with me. We have to learn about verbals. A verbal is just a verb that functions as a different part of speech. For example, we are going to be learning about a verbal called a gerund. And you may have heard that word before, you may not have. Either way, it's fine. All a gerund is, it's an ing verb that functions as a noun. Okay? So, for example, swimming. So we look at the word swimming and we say, oh, that's a verb. Swimming is something you do. However, in this sentence, swimming is my favorite summer activity. The word swimming is functioning as a noun. It's actually functioning as the subject of the sentence here. So we have this term for that called a gerund. Here's another example. My brother really enjoys hunting. Hunting represents an activity, a concept. In this sentence, the word hunting is the direct object. It's functioning as a noun here. So, and here's where, you can't just memorize something, oh, ing. You have to really understand what a gerund is, how it functions in the sentence. The other verbal we need to learn about is a participle. And a participle is an ing or ed verb that functions as an adjective. And so I'm sure you can see right away, you can't just rely on that ing thing to help you identify it, okay? Because an ing verb can either be a gerund or a participle. So I purposefully use the same word here, swimming. The swimming cat frantically tried to get out of the pool. So in this sentence, the word swimming is functioning as an adjective. It's modifying the noun cat. And that's what differentiates how the word swimming functions in this sentence as opposed to that first sentence, swimming is my favorite summer activity. And this is vital for you to understand. If you are going to be able to tell the difference between gerund phrases and participle phrases, then you have got to understand the difference between a gerund and a participle, how one acts like a noun and the other acts like an adjective. Let me give you another example. Sometimes a participle can end in ed. We heard the excited tone in his voice. So to excite, that's a verb. Here we have the ed form of that verb, excited, functioning as an adjective, modifying the noun tone. Okay, so now that you hopefully understand these terms, let's talk about what this looks like as far as phrases. So a gerund phrase consists of a gerund. It will always begin with that ing word and any related words. So something to note, because a gerund functions as a noun, a gerund phrase will always be an integral part of the sentence. It's always going to be the subject, the direct object. It can also be a complement. It can be a predicate noun. But the main hint I want you to know here is that a gerund phrase cannot be removed from the sentence. If you take a gerund phrase out, you no longer have a sentence. Okay, so for example, playing baseball professionally has always been his dream. So we have that ing word at the beginning. That's our clue, okay? And the fact that this whole phrase is the subject of the sentence, playing baseball professionally has always been his dream, that helps us furthermore be able to identify this as a gerund phrase because it's acting like the subject of the sentence. If you took that phrase out, you would no longer have a sentence. So the gerund phrase here is the subject. She really enjoyed cooking gourmet meals. Again, that ing, that's always going to be your tip-off. And here, the gerund phrase is the direct object. She is the subject, enjoyed is the verb. What is being enjoyed? Cooking gourmet meals is the direct object. So you can't remove this phrase, she really enjoyed what? It needs a direct object. So that little clue that you can't take a gerund phrase out of a sentence will really help you on a quiz or a test in telling the difference between gerund and participial phrases. Okay, so let's talk about a participial phrase. This consists of a participle, so it's always going to begin with an ing or an ed verb and the words that go with it. Now remember, a participle functions as an adjective. It's a modifier. Therefore, it's not an integral part of the sentence. So a participial phrase can be taken out. For example, nodding respectfully at the judges, the gymnast began her routine. Okay, so that phrase, we could cross that out and we would still have a complete sentence. The gymnast began her routine. Because what this whole phrase is doing, it's modifying the noun gymnast. Okay, it starts with that ing, nodding respectfully at the judges, the gymnast. And often participial phrases do begin a sentence and have a comma after them. Not always, but they often do. Here's another example. The cat crouching behind the sofa is named Pepper. So here we have another ing verb, but you could take that out. You could still say the cat is named Pepper because all that this phrase is doing is it's modifying the word cat. It's describing cat, the cat crouching behind the sofa. And then let me also give you an ed example. Scared by the loud thunder, the small child hid under her bed. So there we have an ed. And so that's easier to recognize because there are no other types of phrases that will begin with an ed verb. So if it begins with an ed verb, you know it's a participial phrase. It's just those ing verbs that can be a little tricky. So I hope that the difference between a gerund phrase and a participial phrase makes sense to you. So let's look at a few more examples and do a little practice. And the way this is going to work on a quiz or a test is you'll be given, here are 10 sentences and they all have phrases underlined. Okay, so you're never actually going to have to do the underlining yourself. The phrase will already be underlined, but then you have to identify what type of phrase that is. Kind of like how we do with parts of speech. Steve, an honor student, will graduate this spring. All right, so it's set off by commas. That's a clue. And also, it's renaming the word it comes after. That's a clue that this is a positive phrase. What about this one? Studying regularly can improve any student's grades. What's your first clue? Your first clue should be that it begins with an ing verb, right? So because it begins with an ing verb, you know it's either going to be a gerund phrase or a participial phrase. So then we ask ourselves the question, well, how is it functioning in the sentence? Can I take it out? If I cross that out, then what do I have left? Can improve any student's grades. Is that a complete sentence? Nope. So it must be a gerund phrase. It's functioning as the subject of the sentence. You can't take it out. You will find a raincoat in the closet. All right, this begins with the word in, which is prepositional phrase. Those are pretty easy. Studying regularly, Meredith was able to raise her English grade. Now, I did this on purpose. I want you to see how the same phrase can function in two different ways. So here again, we have the ing. And here's the thing, though. Can this one be crossed out? If we cross that out, what will we be left with? Meredith was able to raise her English grade. Still a complete sentence. So that means it's not acting like a noun, it's not the subject of the sentence, it's a modifier. It's modifying the noun narrative, which makes it a participial phrase. I hope that makes sense to you and can help you with this concept. Finally, some managers seem to understand their employees well. So we have to plus the verb to understand, which if you remember is an infinitive phrase. So when you go to take the quiz on phrases and clauses, and when you get to this section in the test, this is exactly what it's going to look like with phrases underlined, and then you have to identify each one. So practice, do the practice quiz, take the practice test before you take the final, and you should be able to identify these well.